how you react to some of that adversity really does determine your career and how far you can go. Because like you said, we're all going to face it. We're all going to hit that wall. We're all going to get no's. We've all had that in the past. But can you fight through them? Those are the kind of guys that usually succeed. The ones that use the no, learn from it, get motivated by it, and go prove somebody wrong.
Hey guys, as I'm sure you can tell, I am in the car because I'm on the road, but I didn't want to wait. I wanted to hurry up and bring you another episode of the Advocate Podcast. As a reminder, this is a show where we dive deep in the world of baseball with the game's most influential figures. I'm your host, Matt Hannaford, and today we have a very special guest. My guest today is Steve Bernhardt. He is the VP of Baseball Operations at Baseball Factory. Steve has helped shape the careers of countless young players, and he's a true expert in both player development and scouting, and really everything that goes into building the next generation of baseball talent. In this episode, we are going to explore specifically his journey, but also we're going to talk about the impact of Baseball Factory, and he provides some insights on the future of the game of baseball. This is an episode that you do not want to miss. It is filled with actionable advice for any parents and players looking to navigate the world of travel baseball. So without further ado, here's my episode with Steve Bernhardt from Baseball Factory. All right, Steve, I'm joined today by Steve Bernhardt. Steve, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are the Chief Baseball Officer at Baseball Factory. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Actually, it's currently Vice President of Baseball Operations. I think they've been switching it back and forth, but I'm doing the same thing.
Okay, got it. I took a look, and that's what it said, or that's what was listed. But Obviously, we go way back. I've known you for a long time. I guess I want to make it clear to all the listeners out there, my intention for having Steve on today is really to provide you guys with, both parents and players, some actionable steps that you can ultimately take as you leave this conversation. We'll get into it, but Steve has a wealth of knowledge on player development. And I'll have you go into this, Steve, momentarily. But just, you obviously played in high school, you played in college, you did play professionally. And then since then, you've been in the baseball world, longer than I've been with Baseball Factory. So I guess to start us off, I know you're from Maryland, but tell everybody who's listening, give us your background up until college.
Okay. Just grew up in a suburb of Baltimore and loved playing multiple sports, which I'm sure we'll get into. I encourage. Played baseball in high school, along with a few other things. And really just loved the game, enjoyed competing, was normally the smallest guy on my team and not necessarily the most heralded growing up, but worked at it and developed some consistency and started to mature and get a little bit bigger and stronger. Me personally in high school, freshman year, I got cut from JV baseball. So I ended up going out and playing for the golf team, begging the golf coach to let me do that so I could do something in the spring. Decided to go back out, play JV sophomore year and then varsity for 2 years, and then really went unrecruited and walked on in college after that.
Which I want to get into because I think you have such an interesting perspective as far as that goes. I read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, you actually had to, I think you took it upon yourself kind of to write letters to some of these college coaches. Is that right?
Exactly. That's impressive research. Yes.
I do my work.
It's also, unfortunately, and you dropped in there that I've been doing this longer than you. It also dates me a little bit, but yes, I actually physically wrote letters to the schools that I was interested in and thought I could get in academically, and wrote to their coach and introduced myself, let them know who I was, started communication there to see if they had any interest. And then from there, kind of went on my own visits to go meet them and check out the campuses.
And I'm going to come back to that point because I think that's an important one for all these players out here. I think so many, and I want to make sure I'm specific here. I think every player could benefit from hearing this conversation. But as far as the things that you just said, let's put aside kind of the top 1% of players out there who they're not going to need to write letters. But I want to talk about kind of just the remaining guys out there who, if they're not being recruited, maybe they think it's a sign that maybe they should stop playing, right? What is your advice to any one of these kids who has the desire? And let's assume on some level they have the skill. I don't mean that they don't have the skill. Let's assume they have the skill. But what would you tell them as far as them needing to take the initiative to ensure that their career continues beyond just high school if they have the passion for it?
Well, it's exactly what you said. They have to have the initiative. They have to drive the bus. And, to a certain extent, I guess, the parent needs to be involved at a certain age and drive the player around and get them signed up for things and that kind of stuff. But at some point, there's a transition and the career becomes more in the hands of the player than the parents, family, whatever it may be. And in those instances, just to your point, you have to want it enough to continue to work and develop on that side of it, but you also have to be aggressive right now in finding the right fit for yourself and going out and reaching out to coaches and getting yourself opportunities and getting yourself known. And what goes hand in hand with that we talk to a lot of families about and parent and players, you have to be open-minded. Like
Hmm.
you can't necessarily, not everybody is playing for one of the 8 teams that ends up in Omaha
Right.
every year. It's great if you can, to your point, that top 1 or 2% or whatever it is. But there are a lot of other great opportunities out there to get your education, to play baseball for 4 more years, to compete with a team, to make those memories, to mature, connections. Like there's so many other things that go into this sport, and there are tremendous opportunities out there. But in most cases, if they're not knocking on your door, you need to go find those opportunities.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. I don't want to say most, a lot of players think it's going to be, and I don't, maybe they think it's going to be easy. They just think it's going to go and opportunities are going to present themselves. And and this is really for whether you're a pro ball player, whether you're in college or whether you're in high school right now. You have to create opportunities. If you haven't hit a wall yet, undoubtedly you will, right? And you obviously saw it at multiple levels through your journey. But I think a lot of these kids, unfortunately, and I don't know why this is, but yeah, you think the first level of adversity you come to, that it's like a sign that, oh, maybe I'm not good enough. But what I want people to hear is like, no, this is ultimately sharpening your saw for the future. And if you have the right outlook, and I'll just tell this quick story. I was talking to a player today, and he didn't really, it wasn't a player I was representing, but through a friend of a friend, I had a conversation with him. He wasn't happy with how the draft played out. And I basically said to him, I said, I want you to paint this picture. We're 20 years from now, and you're looking back on your career having achieved everything you've ever wanted to, right? I said, what are some of those goals? And I said, think really big. And he said, well, I want to win the Cy Young Award. I want to, and I actually threw out to him, like, do you want to make the Hall of Fame? Like, is that something that you would like to do? He said, yes. I said, all right, what else? He said, an all-star. I want to play for over 15 years in the big leagues. And he named all these different things. And I said, if you were to approach this draft and how it went from that lens, you're that guy 15, 20 years from now, and you're looking back on the draft. What would now describe what that draft experience was like? And the word that came to mind for me, and he echoed it, was that was a little bit of an inconvenience, right? But it's funny, just changing that perspective, the draft goes from being a disappointment that ultimately is going to be the reason why I never get there to, well, yeah, it's a little inconvenient that I had to deal with that. And I said to him, I go, what if it's the rocket fuel for that propels you ultimately forward to being able to achieve all these different things? So to your point, Steve, what if the hurdle of getting a scholarship, you had to take it upon yourself to pound the pavement, to write letters, to send video, to reach out to coaches yourself? What if that becomes kind of the catalyst for you ultimately having this desire and passion that even grows in the future? I mean, if people had that outlook, I feel like it would put this whole thing in perspective a lot easier for them. But I just think with the kids' ages nowadays, like, yeah, it's a lesson that they need to learn. But the more people like you and I who encourage this way of thinking, I think ultimately it'll kind of bring them out of their shell.
Yeah, I agree. I love the story you just told, and it's funny you said rocket fuel, and the word that came to mind for me was motivation. Like it's an inconvenience, but it can be a motivator too. Do you let it crush you? Do you get sad, or does it motivate you and drive you to prove some people wrong and to still pursue your dreams and follow them? And I think how you react to some of that adversity really does determine your career and how far you can go. Because, like you said, we're all going to face it. We're all going to hit
Right.
that wall. We're all going to get no's. We've all had that in the past. But can you fight through them? How important is it to you? Those are the kind of guys that usually succeed. The ones that use the no, learn from it, get motivated by it, and go prove somebody wrong.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I want to kind of paint the whole picture of your career, and then we're going to go back. So after college, Were you drafted? Did you sign as a free agent? How did you become a professional?
Yeah, like I said, walked on in college, and it was kind of old school. I think I got about 5 at bats freshman year. Kept foul balls from going in the lake at University of Richmond.
Right.
Instead of playing, paying your dues, I guess, and got a
Yep.
chance eventually work my way into playing. And to your story before, thought I was going to get drafted. Come draft day, had talked to a couple teams, not a lot. I knew I wasn't a high profile guy, but it had done decent at a mid level Division I school, and talked to some organizations and some area scouts. It was disappointing that didn't happen. And that was back that year. The draft was 40 rounds, so
Right. I
all
remember
those
those
teams passed
days.
on me 40 times. So started working. I took a job, started working in the Richmond area, got a call, went to a couple tryout camps, continued to kind of work connections that I had made, and got a call and an opportunity to go to spring training the following year with the Colorado Rockies, because they were an expansion team at the time. The timing was just good for me. They were trying to build out their minor league system. The year before was their first draft. They only had like 1 or 2 minor league teams at that time. We're beefing it up for the next year, and basically was told, hey, if you've got a good job, you probably don't want to turn it down, but we'll give you a plane ticket and an opportunity if you want to try it. And I jumped at it, and luckily they kept me around for 5 years.
And obviously, with what you do now at Baseball Factory, which we will dive into, how has being a professional and what you experienced as a professional bled into kind of your outlook on the business that you're currently in?
Well, I think on like a specific level, it's helped because the development side is so near and dear to my heart and to what we do at Baseball Factory. So being able to see the way some of these really good baseball people ran spring training, ran pregame workouts when they came into town as a roving instructor and things like that at the professional level, being around really good players and really good coaches. I think it's helped for me to help put together our curriculum for young players in how to develop individually, how to learn team fundamentals in the game, how to gain some confidence, how to overcome adversity, those kind of things that I experienced and got to see firsthand, I think have really helped in what I do now.
And so, as I think about, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a parent or a player, in youth baseball right now. There's 2 big things that jump out at me that I think the listener would find value in us kind of diving into a little bit more in depth. One is the college recruiting process, which you kind of touched on earlier. And then the second is something that you and I both kind of share an interest in, which is the player development, component, and really diving into how Baseball Factory helps players develop. And I know how you guys specifically do, and I want to kind of give these families a taste of what that looks like. Because I think for anybody out there who knows that development is important, I think that word is thrown around a lot, and they just think, oh yeah, my son's developing. He's doing enough. I want to actually like peel back the curtain a little bit and help them understand, well, what does that actually look like from an organization like yours, who I would say it's almost like scientific how you guys do it. It's not, hey, we're just going to throw some stuff on the wall and see what works. It's much more specific to the individual, which I do want to get into. So as we start with the college recruiting process, and again, just to reiterate, think about like the 99%, right? So I've heard you say that players need like a planned out marketing strategy, right?
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what is that? And let's get a little bit more granular as far as like, well, if you were making a list of things that anybody would potentially need to do on that list, what would those things be?
Well, if you don't mind, let me back up, because like the
Sure.
first thing that we do when we invite players out is a 1-day workout where our scouts evaluate them, because I think you need an honest assessment of where you stand. Like we go all over the country and do these workouts. We see players in every state. So we have a pretty good idea if you're a sophomore and you come out between the metrics and measurables that we take, and then the more subjective, old school scouting that we do, where we trust our guys to watch the player and write notes and see where they are. Like, I think you need that first, or I think a family needs that first, of like, this is where he is. And then this is where we think he could go. We're not right all the time. Scouting's an inexact science. But the other thing that we do at at Baseball Factory that I think is different than any other company that I know of is after you come out to that one day event, there's somebody that's going to talk to you on the phone and tell you what our scouts saw, what we see as average versus what your son did. Anything from broad jump to exit velocity to 60-yard dash to this is what we saw in his swing, in his balance, in the way he fields ground balls, and the way he comes out of the chute and throws to second if you're a catcher, like those kind of things to spend time with a family and say, like, we've done this for a long time. We see players all over the country. This is what we see now. This is how he compares to other people. This is where we think he could go. And if he wants to get there, this is our recommendation for that plan to develop. And so the reason I go back that far is we have to make sure that the timing is right to start this recruiting process. You only get one chance to make a first impression with these schools. So if this is your dream school, you may be able to play there sometime, but to jump in front of them too early when you're not ready and make that bad first impression, that's tough to shake from a coach sometimes if he sees something and kind of says, well, no, that guy's not for us. So it all is kind of intertwined, I think, where we want to make sure that the advice is good, that, okay, these are schools where we think you could play. These are schools where I think you could get into academically. And let's do some safety schools, some fit schools, and some read schools. Let's dream on it. You never know. Just like in the draft, it takes one team to like you and pick you at a certain spot and pay you. It takes one school, one coach to like you, and maybe it's an ACC or SEC school, and the others aren't recruiting you. So let's set that all up so that you've got a chance for some safeties, fit, and read schools.
That actually makes perfect sense, and it's funny. And to show you how aligned we are, that was actually something that I did want to get in depth with on the next component of this was this honest evaluation. So, okay, let's take that then, and you have a player come out, you evaluate them, you give them this honest assessment from another party, right? Somebody who has the experience in doing this exact thing. You hand them this, or you send it to them in an email. They have now this breakdown. How much do you help them at that point forward, again, with this marketing strategy and with these other things that they need to do? Are you like stewarding them through it, or how does that whole thing work?
So they're assigned someone in our organization we call their player development coordinator. And that's the person that goes over the initial evaluation with them, makes recommendations for other events on the development side, on the exposure side, recruiting side, whatever it may be. They may or may not do those events that we recommend, but that person will always be a resource for them throughout their career. If they ever want to call them and ask them something, what do you think of this college camp? What do those kind of questions, happy to answer them. We do have a separate, like, more hands-on recruiting program that they would go into if they wanted kind of full walk you through, help you develop college lists, the whole marketing plan, reaching out to schools, how to talk to them, like all that kind of stuff is a little bit more intense than what we normally do with a player that just comes out to an evaluation. But we will go through that stuff with them and continue to be a resource if they ever want to call in and chat with our player development coordinator. They're more than happy to help and give advice.
One of the things that you and I have talked about recently is, and you kind of mentioned it briefly, not every player needs to have their eyes solely focused on the 8 teams in Omaha, right? The 8 programs in Omaha. We talked about the transfer portal recently, you and I just kind of catching up. And right. I do think it's important to kind of actually have this conversation where these families now need to understand there is such an importance with going to a school and actually playing, right? If you go back 15, 20 years, I think what would happen is these players would go to college, and as a freshman, they wouldn't play, but they would like get experience, get their feet wet, and then ultimately build to play their sophomore and junior year. And from my experience, at least recently, I feel like those situations are few and far between now. Most of the time, because of the transfer portal, if these kids are going to these programs and they're not playing as a freshman, a lot of times the school will transfer in a guy who now is going to compete with you as a sophomore. And so instead of only looking at, let's just say, these Power 5 conference schools, be open-minded to potentially other programs, maybe D2, maybe NAIA. For some, it could be junior college. Like I played baseball at a junior college, and for me, that was the right call. I think players need to be more open-minded to going to other places. And I'm not recommending going to a place and then transferring out, but if you go to a place and perform at a high level, then maybe there's an opportunity later to transfer out. But at least at that point, you're developing as a player and you're not wasting a whole year.
Yeah, certainly being on the field and playing is so key. And to your point, there's so many great opportunities out there at all levels. For me, being a Baltimore guy, Johns Hopkins, like one of the best degrees you can get. They're perennially ranked in the top 20 in Division Three. They seem to go to the Division Three College World Series almost every other year. They've had guys drafted several years lately and get an opportunity to play professional baseball. So, when you look at that total package, it's pretty appealing as opposed to going somewhere and sitting on the bench. Or to your point, a lot of great junior college opportunities. You get a lot of reps. Oftentimes you get an opportunity for more scholarship money right away, and it might help the financial situation for the family. You get a shot to play. There's great competition. There's scouts out there and certainly recruiters out there to go to 4-year places after. So I agree with you. There are so many different avenues you can take to get where you want to go. But it is challenging right now with the transfer portal coming out of the extra COVID years for players and things like that. In my 25 years doing this, the last couple of years have been the hardest for high school seniors to find the right fit and to get interest and things like that. It's been challenging for them, no doubt.
When you go through this college stuff with these players, are you getting questions about NIL?
I would say starting to, but again, for us, that level player is usually going to you, Matt,
Right.
and asking you the NIL question. So we get some early for maybe what we've heard or certain schools, or do we have any history there, or what should he be looking for? But that's not something that we've gotten too involved in directing players. We would usually,
Sure.
send them to somebody else to talk NIL. But the conversation, at least, or hearing it, it's coming up more often.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's something that I've noticed. I was recently on a Zoom with a travel baseball program where I just, devoted my time to just help educate these families. And I was surprised the number of questions about NIL. And it's not that I didn't think it was going to come up. I was just surprised with how many questions there were. And, again, go back 5 years, that wouldn't have even been something that anybody even touches. So I think it's just another example of how the game is changing. And I'll be curious to see in the next 3 years if you start to get even more. And I'm not saying they're going to you saying, help me with this, but more or less like, how does this work? Right.
Yet we are getting a little more of that with a high level player. Really, the high level parent is the one that's asking most of the time, like I'm sure is the case with you or on that Zoom. So yes, it is out there more and more. And to compete, as I'm sure you're hearing, like more and more schools are having to try and put funds together to be able to offer this to players.
Yeah. It's a challenge. I mean, there's no question. A lot of these college coaches are, some of my best friends, and feel bad for them, man. It's so competitive. And, go back to what Nick Saban said, when he retired, and I feel for some of these coaches because and I think there's a way to do it, but the old mindset a coach may have, which is, hey, I want the winners. I want the guys that are going to come here and want to be here no matter what. And sometimes these kids nowadays are just like, hey man, I'm only going to come if you can guarantee that I'm going to make X number of dollars. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the Baseball Factory. Some things to note just for everybody who's listening who may not know. So the organization, correct me if I'm wrong, has been around since 1994. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
You guys have hosted over 600 events nationwide each year, ranging from national showcases, camps, and tournaments. And the organization has placed over 100,000 players into college baseball and over 550 at the major league level. Obviously, an organization that knows what they're doing, right?
Thank you. I mean, we play a part in it. Obviously, it's these players that achieve that, but it is nice when we get a chance to hopefully help them along their journey a little bit, no doubt.
Yeah, and so I do want to kind of jump in a little bit to the player development conversation that you and I have had. So something that I am vocal about is what I would call kind of the hierarchy of needs for these players. And the hierarchy of needs I'm referring to, if there were 3 things that anybody would consider, it would be exposure, competition, and development, right? Assume those are the three things that I want to talk about.
Okay.
Most families, in my experience nowadays, put exposure as the number one thing, right? And they think if they get the exposure for their son, obviously he's going to compete. That's the byproduct of that. And then if he can do that, then over time he's going to develop. And it's development kind of just, is out there in the abyss. I think players are focused on it and parents are focused on it. But how much should they do? I don't really know. And what I have been saying for a long time is flip that upside down, right? Make development head and shoulders the number one thing that you're focused on. And when you can develop, then you use competition as a tool to test the development. And then naturally a byproduct of those two things is you're a good player and you're going to get exposure. You're going to get exposure maybe because you're going to the event at the right time and you're showcasing your talent. Maybe you're getting the exposure because these scouts, they know who the best players are and they're going to come find you. You guys focus a lot on development, and I would like to kind of get into what that looks like. I guess, do you have anything to say as far as I just shared?
Yeah, I love it. I'm aligned that way, and we've been trying to preach that for a long time. It has to be a mix, like you said. There's no doubt that it does. But I think there's too much pressure to be able to say, my son played 80 games this summer at 12 years old, but when we ask him how many practices did he have, or what improvements did he make, how much time did he spend on development, they practice once every 2 weeks or something like that leading up to a tournament. And I agree with you 100%. The priority has to be the development side. It really does. You need to spend time doing that. You and I talk to enough people on the college coach side. The feedback that I get a lot of times, well, this kid's talented, but he doesn't know how to play the game. He
Right.
showed up in the fall. He wants to be my starting shortstop. He didn't know where to go on a cutoff on a ball to left center field with a man on first. These things need to happen. So, getting into what we do at our development events, a lot of it is individual skill specific training to try and get better. For sure, we trust our instructors and give guys some ideas. Some of it is reps, so that you're testing some new things, learning some new things. You got to do it over and over again and be able to just start to react that way. But part of it is team fundamentals too. Cuts and relays, first and third plays, bunt defenses. Is that the most exciting and sexy part of it? No, but that wins. And that's what coaches are looking for. So it's mixing all those things. And then, when you do those things and you become good at it and it's second nature, then you're much better in that competition phase of it. To your point, you would be amazed if you spend more time on development when you go into those games, what kind of impact you have now and how much better you look. And to your point, then that final piece is the exposure. And now when somebody comes out to see you, they like you. Right. You're the name they're circling. You're not just blending in with the rest of that group. One other thing I would say on the development side is we also feel that you need to continue to develop as an athlete. And so, I do think we were one of the first groups to have a dedicated speed and strength guy at our development baseball camps and events where let's work on some of that. It depends on age and maturity and everything else, but you can start to do some body weight stuff to gain some strength. And then you can start to learn how to gain strength the right way as you're getting bigger and stronger. We can work on running form. We can work on quickness and agility. Just overall making you a better athlete. And the better athletes usually become better baseball players too.
Right. I think, and I actually thought about this as you were talking. If you look at the major league season, right, they play 162 games. And I think that idea of, well, the pros are playing every day, so I need to get more reps in a game actually has a negative effect on these players for the reasons that you said. What players and parents maybe don't pay attention to is, but these guys also have, well, number one, they're anywhere from 23 to, 38, 39, 40 years old. They've been doing this for a long time. They don't need to, focus on the fundamentals necessarily as much because they're so ingrained in who they are. But they also have spring training for 45 days that gets them ready for the season. If you're a player out there and you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, man, I definitely would have interest in going to one of these camps. Do you guys, how many of you guys have a year? I'm assuming they're regional, right? You guys do them all over the place?
We do. We do some national events. So it goes back to kind of that initial evaluation, like where we grade out players equates to where we would invite them to, like
Got it.
to what level event we have based on age and ability level, because we want to try and keep somewhat like ability levels together so we can teach at the same level for players. Sometimes we feel like it's more strictly developmental, slow it down, go back through some basics, teach some fundamentals, get our body movements right, control that, those kind of things that will lead to a little bit better success, especially for younger players. Then it goes into a mix of development and what we would call like internal tournaments. Like we control games and try and make it a little bit competitive, but at the same time, something that you're learning and repping in the morning, you might be able to test that in kind of a low pressure environment in the afternoon in a game where it's not whether or not you're going to make varsity or JV or whether you're going to get to stay in the starting lineup. And in those cases, I just think sometimes you have to do that. You got to slow it down, take some pressure off, test some things, try some new things that people who are knowledgeable about the game pass down to you so that you can have more success. But to just continually try and make adjustments on the fly in games, in tournament games, trying to win a championship, trying to make a team like that, that's a difficult thing to do.
Right.
You got to back away sometimes to make these strides forward, I think.
So Steve, what's coming to mind for me as I'm hearing you talk, and this is probably intentional on your guys' part. When people think of pro ball, or at least what I know of pro ball, if someone were thinking about it, like this is where I think their mind would go. All right, well, I'm gonna enter an organization and I have these different levels that I need to hit. And part of going through the organization is developing, but it's also playing games and it's having instruction and coaches and some guidance. And this organization is helping me ultimately be kind of the best version of myself as a player. It sounds like you guys are doing the exact same thing, just at a younger age, right? You guys essentially are taking kids that are hungry in youth baseball and you're saying, look, we're going to basically do what an organization, at least it seems, does. And you're going to evaluate them. You're then going to take the evaluation and you're going to start steering them to focus on different areas. And it almost seems like you guys are building this plan for the player to ultimately be the best version of himself.
That's a great way to describe it. Yeah, we want them to maximize their potential, certainly. And now we're part of the Ripken family, so we're getting a chance to work with some players even at a younger age and try and instill those good habits and get them on the right track for that plan to maximize their ability. And we want them to, usually if they have success, they're having fun. We want this game to be fun and we want people to keep playing it. Like you and I love it. It's brought a lot to our lives. We're passionate about it. We know what it can do for young people. I want people to play it as long as they can and enjoy it. And I think it all kind of goes hand in hand. And while we're trying to build these good players, we try and build good people too. At our events, we usually have a life skills chat, usually for the older players, a recruiting chat. We're talking about being a good teammate. We're talking about being a good student and the emphasis on academics and how that can open an awful lot of doors too for these young players. Like, I think it all goes hand in hand. I really do. And I think, our goal, to your point, is to maximize a player's potential. We want them to leave events and experiences with us as a better player, hopefully a better person. And the cool thing is we see them leave usually with a new level of confidence. And that can be a powerful thing. A confident person and player can be a really powerful thing. So we love making players better, but we also love using the game of baseball to hopefully motivate them in other areas too and understand the importance of the classroom and being a good person and teammate.
Do you find that players oftentimes feel like they don't have enough time to be as good as they could be?
For sure. I mean, there are a lot of demands and, they're still young. You want them to be able to be kids. So like to kind of force that professional mindset and schedule on them is difficult. It goes back again to what we talked about earlier. If the player's driving the bus and just can't get enough of it and wants to do it 24/7, then sure. That may not be for everybody, but yes, there are challenges. Obviously, there are academic challenges. There's social things that can get in the way. As we talk to players and you start trying to map out your calendar and your priorities, what's important to you, where do you want to go, and how are you going to get there? You've got to give up some things and sacrifice some things if the baseball thing is important to you. And it is a challenge to get everything in, especially as you get older and the speed and strength training becomes more important, and the academics take up more of your time to do them well. And there's other things you want to get other stuff on your resume for a college application if you're not one of that top 1 or 2% that is just baseball that's getting you in. So
Right.
it's a challenge, I think, for these guys to have the time to do it. And I think it's a challenge also for them to prioritize the way to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Obviously, you probably deal with kids as young as, well, I guess, how young is your youngest group?
I mean, we usually do quite a bit with like middle school age players, but again, like, part of our integration with some of the Ripken baseball tournaments and events and all Ripken games that they do, we're starting to see players probably as early as 9 years old now,
Wow.
at different events.
Hey, if they're hungry, right?
Right. Right.
I love
It,
it.
it's a building block process, for the younger guys. Obviously, it's a lot different than the intensity level of what we would
Sure.
recommend for older players, for sure.
No, I can only imagine. All right. So I said early at the onset of this interview podcast, I told you it wasn't going to be an interview, uh, that I wanted to give these families something to kind of walk away with, take away. So there's something that I know that you guys do, again, talking about you wanting, players and these kids to ultimately reach their full potential. I've noticed that you guys kind of have a 6-step process that I've seen on your website that I would like to kind of touch on. The first of which you actually spoke about earlier, which is create the honest evaluation, right?
Right.
And you said there's 2 components to that. Obviously, there's a self-evaluation, like, let's talk about how good you think you are, but it's also important to have what you described as kind of an objective evaluation from a scout, which we talked about that earlier. So we don't need to spend much
Right.
time on that.
Okay.
But I want to talk about kind of the second step, I guess, which is formulate long-term goals. How do you guys help these kids ultimately create these long-term goals?
Yeah, a lot of times that's with the conversation with our player development coordinator when we kind of see where they are. And again, like, players develop at different times. And, we talked a little bit about my history, getting cut, walking on. Like, we don't like to give up on players because who knows? At 13 years old, you're not done. You're
Right.
just getting started. So if you're not the biggest or best at that point, that doesn't mean that we're writing anybody off. So we love guys to dream. We do want to be a little bit realistic, as you get older and we get a pretty good idea of where the fit's going to be. And really, if you want to play in college baseball, realistically, probably who is going to recruit you.
Mhm.
There may be an outlier like we talked about here or there, but we have an idea from doing it so long. Like, this is probably the grouping of schools that would have interest. So let's be a little bit realistic, but let's map out our goals. And again, we overlap. So certainly there are a lot of athletic goals. There may be some metrics you want to hit. There may be some statistics that you want to hit. It may just be teams that you want to make and play for, playing time. It can be any of those things, and it's going to be individual to each player. And then we think hand in hand with that, there should be some academic goals and some things like that. We've said a lot of times, like, when your GPA becomes as important or more important to you than your batting average, then we're getting somewhere. This needs to be 2 things moving at the same time for most of the players that we deal with.
I love that. Yeah, I don't hear many people say that, and you're absolutely right. Especially in college, because hey, if you can't stay eligible, there is no playing, right?
Correct.
So
Correct. And you've been around enough scouts and talked to them about your players before. Usually these kind of habits carry over. And I
sure,
know kind of scouts look for it. Like, sometimes it's difficult if somebody, if you see somebody and they're disrespectful to their parents after a game or to their teammates, or they're not cleaning up the dugout or throwing trash down, or they're not paying attention, their GPA is low and they're not trying in the classroom. Like, it's kind of tough some people can do it, but it's kind of tough to turn it off there and then turn it on the field and be great at working and being your best and showing up at the park every day ready to play and being a good teammate. It's a little bit of a challenge. So usually it goes hand in hand. And I know a lot of the older scouts at least look to those kind of things, I think, as indicators of whether this guy is going to work, overcome adversity, be a team guy, all those kind of things in the future. And college coaches, I think, look for the same things too.
No doubt. I was having a conversation, this a couple of years ago, a player I don't represent, but I was meeting with him and his family. And we were just touching on the various things that obviously happened through the draft process. One of which was, these questionnaires that a lot of these families get, right? These players get, which you're familiar with. And the mom, I obviously just broached the subject. Hey, you're obviously going to get a lot of these questionnaires. And she says, yeah, we don't need to worry about that. I'm going to take care of those for them. And I just thought such a, number one, a lost opportunity for the kid, because look, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're not going to be here forever, he's going to have to eventually, if he's going to play professional baseball, he's going to be away and he's going to have to stand on his own 2 feet. And what a lost opportunity for him to actually take this upon himself and to do this for himself. And it was just this thing where I just thought, and again, when you've been around the game as long as we have, you see these little things and you're like, okay, that's going to show up somewhere else.
No doubt. And I love what you said there, because like back to some of our development events, there's a piece of that that just helps the maturation process, I think. So for instance, like we do some events right before and right after Christmas down at Pirate City in Bradenton, Florida, the spring training home of the Pirates. And they have a really nice housing unit right on campus. They've got a dining hall there. So these players are immersed in it. It's like they're a minor leaguer or it's like they're in college. So they're going to have a roommate that they probably didn't know coming in that may be from a different part of the country. They've got to get along for a few days. They've got to make sure they get up, eat breakfast, show up on time so we don't have to go knocking on their door. There's a curfew at night. Like some of these learning experiences, to your point, they may not have had before. So it's an experience for them to be responsible and start to learn and start to feel what it's like to be on your own a little bit. And then the flip side is it might be the first time that mom and dad have had to say goodbye to their son for a couple nights where he's kind of on his own, and they're getting prepared for that, either college or the pro ball thing too. So there are a lot of little nuances to some of the events that I think benefit players and parents in the long run from having that experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Okay, so number one, create an honest evaluation. Number two, formulate long-term goals. Number three, I noticed, is develop a game plan. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what do you mean by game plan?
Yeah, I think that's like, how are we going to reach the goals? And a lot of it is the development side that we talked about that sometimes gets lost. So let's look at that calendar over the next 12 to 18 months and make sure that it's not just games. Make sure that, listen, you're getting some rest. Make sure that if you enjoy playing another sport, that we've got time for that too. Make sure that we're doing stuff so that you stay healthy and we don't miss games because of injury. Like it's kind of that full game plan to develop and get better. But also, you got to live your life as a young player. So we need to make sure that there's time for all of it. To your point before, that you've only got 24 hours in a day. So let's figure out how we use them a little bit and how you develop and become the best you.
Well, I love that you guys actually call that out, because how many people do we know? Well, first off, how many people do we know that don't set goals? I mean, I would tell you it's a ton. And it's one of the things that I work on with my guys all the time now, because I know they don't do it, and I know how impactful it can be. But let's just assume for a second someone does set goals. Even fewer people actually create a plan to achieve them, right? They love the exercise of saying, okay, I'm going to, and they'll, just speaking statistically, I'm going to hit 350 this year with 15 homers and 25 stolen bases. And I'm going to be in the baseball factory All-American game. And I'm going to do all these different things. But they don't take the next step to, okay, are you committed to doing that? And if you are, then let's talk about what that commitment means on a daily basis, right? Like you've got to take the next step. And so I love that you guys actually call that out, because I think most kids, they think I'm working out all day. I'm practicing all day. I'm playing in games all day. I'm going to these events. I'm doing enough. I'm doing what everyone else is doing. Should be good enough. It's like, no, you got to get more granular and specific.
Agree. So you know, a young man's playing third base, games on the line, winning runs on tying runs on third, winning runs on second, 2 outs, bottom of the last inning. Guy tops it. He comes in on the slow roller, throws it down the right field line, game over, and they lose. And then the question is, when he's upset that he didn't make the play, how many times have you practiced that play?
Right.
Like, have you done it at game speed? Have you practiced slow rollers? Or, you know, this all goes back to that game plan. Or is it just, you know, go out and take ground balls and go between the legs and flip it around, and I got my 15, 20 minutes in. I did my defensive reps for today. Like, it's got to be intentional. It has to be with a purpose for these guys that are serious about getting better.
Yeah, I want to tell a quick story because you just brought that up, and I think that's so important. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who's a client of mine, third baseman with the Toronto Blue Jays, was with the Yankees the last couple of years. As a free agent this offseason, we had meetings with a bunch of different teams. And in the meeting, obviously, you have the general manager, sometimes the president, the manager, the hitting coach, if it's a hitter, sometimes it's the pitching coach if it's a pitcher. And, you know, they're just talking to him about, like, what are some of the things that you like to focus on and work on? And he tells this story about before games. You know, he plays multiple positions. He plays third base this year, but he's played shortstop. He's caught. He's played second. He's played the outfield. What he did is he would go behind third base and he would sprint as hard as he could around the diamond. When he passed second base, the coach would hit a ground ball to him as hard as he could. And it would be his job to get the ground ball, to field it properly, slow everything down, and make a throw to first base. He would do it on that side, and then he would go to the other side of the diamond, run from first base, and then do that at third. And they're like, yeah, they said, we've never heard anybody do this. And he's like, well, think about it. How many times in a game am I off balance and I have to make a throw? Right? Everybody takes ground balls and it's like nice and easy, but very few ground balls you're going to get in a game are at, you know, at that speed. And so when he tells this story, I thought, wow, man, number one, I'm surprised I've never heard anybody else say this before. But number two, good for you. And I asked him, I said, well, why'd you start doing that? He's like, I don't know. I just thought about it and said, this is a great drill if I can just figure out how to, like, implement it the right way.
Can I steal that one?
Absolutely. As long as you call it the Isaiah Kiner-Falefa drill, IKF drill.
Okay. I like it. That's outstanding.
Yeah. So when we talk about the plan, you know, you guys even reference specifically like strength plan, speed plan, agility plan, flexibility plan, mental preparation, arm strength. So I want people to hear that and realize it's not just, okay, my plan today is to work out for 30 minutes. And maybe if it's strategic, that's the plan for today. Okay. But it truly is encapsulating the whole facet of the game and figuring out how to use these things for yourself.
For sure. And, you know, you brought up something that I haven't even mentioned. I've been negligent not to mention it yet. And that's the flexibility side and the stretching. And I listened to your interview with Austin Riley. And when he talked about the forearm workout and the stretching every night, I loved it. That was great because it gets overlooked an awful lot. And one, just for health and staying on the field and not pulling something and getting hurt. And two, it to be flexible, again, it can impact your ability to play this game. You'd be surprised what some flexibility will do to allow you to be a better hitter, to hit balls with more authority, to have a quicker first step, to get better range, quicker jump on a steal, better coming out of the chute. Like, all that stuff is intertwined. So that's good that you mentioned that, because I had not even brought that up. But it's an important thing that these guys some guys work out pretty religiously, but don't pair that with stretching and maintaining flexibility.
Or baseball specific workouts or lifts or things to focus on that are related to baseball more so than bodybuilding or just looking good, right? Okay, so the next component on this list is formulate short-term goals, which obviously makes perfect sense, right? If you think just too far into the future. And to me, it's almost like you're walking down a ladder, right? Long-term goals, game plan. Part of the game plan is, all right, what are the short-term goals that will keep me hungry, that will lead me ultimately to get to my long-term goals?
Exactly.
And then number 5 is execute the game plan through quality practice. I love that.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about just now, quality over quantity. and trying to work at game speed and making it important and intentional. And I think that's the way you get better. I mean, just to go out there and go through the motions and take some reps, I guess it's good that you're out there, you're touching the baseball or the bat a little bit, but I don't think you're going to see real gains until you are trying to do things at game speed with a purpose, making sure that you're improving a little bit each day.
Well, and you brought that specific scenario up, right, where the third baseman needs to field the ground ball, game on the line. You said something, and I want to read it because I think it makes perfect sense. Working on swinging the bat is usually a fun exercise for all players. The tougher thing is for catchers to spend time working on blocking balls to the glove side or infielders to perfect fielding slow rollers. And it's perfect. It's like, yeah, how do I get more specific? And I cannot remember who it was that was talking about this. I think it was just in a game recently, and they interviewed the guy, and he was basically like, do you know how many times I've practiced that play over and over? Like, you watch it one, it may have been Trey Turner, but you watch it one time and think, oh, that was amazing that he pulled that off. It's like, I literally practice that play every single day.
Yeah.
So
it's great.
It is great.
That's what you need to do. I mean, I don't think you can expect to be good at something if you haven't done it an awful lot of times and done it successfully and proven to yourself that you can do it.
Well, and what I love about this too is, again, the last thing, perform in games. And so now you can see, okay, it's not easy enough, because I think everybody listening probably assumes, oh, the best baseball players in the world are just more talented, more gifted. And obviously from you, Steve, who's played pro ball and seen, well, that's not the case, right? You know, plenty of guys. Mike Piazza, for example, was a 62nd round draft pick. He wasn't the best when he was drafted. Now, he had talent, but he was able to put it together. So it's not enough just to be physically gifted. There are so many other levels to this game that you actually can influence, that you need to be aware of and pay attention to and work on.
Sure. And like you said, that all that stuff culminates. They ultimately have to produce. Like, you do have to produce in games. That's what this game is. But all the preparation behind the scenes and leading up to those games and in between those games, that's how you keep getting better. And to your point earlier, like, you ultimately maximize your potential by doing that. And, the more you work at it and see yourself getting better, getting stronger, getting quicker, making those plays in the infield, spending some time, again, like, we get a lot of players like, man, I struck out on a curveball. And say, well, how many times you practice hitting a curveball? How many times have you stood in the box and seen a curveball and reacted to it and decided whether it's going to be a strike or a ball when it gets to the zone, and your timing on it and all those kind of things? Like, these things have to be practiced, but then you can once you do that, you're on autopilot in the game. You're not thinking as much. Obviously, you're thinking through situations, but you're not thinking about mechanics and things like that. It's ingrained in you now. You're confident in your ability, and you just go play the game. And that's when you see, I think, really good production for players.
So people who are listening who want more information about Baseball Factory, where can they find it?
Yeah, I would say they can go right to baseballfactory.com. And we have obviously social media channels out there too, that they can send us a direct message or something. You can reach out directly to me if you like. Bernhardt at baseballfactory.com is my email address. I'm happy to talk with anybody. Just like you, I want to help players. That's what we do. We want them to enjoy this game and play it. So anybody can send me a direct email too, or get on our website and see our events and come out to one of our workouts and get evaluated.
Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you think would be valuable for someone else to hear?
Well, I would say just understand, and we've had this discussion several times, I think, Matt, you're always trying to differentiate yourself. There are a lot of players out there that want that same scholarship, that want to be a first rounder, that want to play in the big leagues. And guys are going to do all that. There are roster spots out there. Somebody's going to play shortstop for the Yankees in a couple years. That's going to happen. Somebody is going to pitch for Florida State and be their Friday night starter. That's great. But there are a lot of people competing for that. So you need to find ways to differentiate yourself to get those opportunities and take advantage of it. Sometimes you run faster, you got more raw power, you hit better, you pitch more effectively. That can be it. Sometimes you're better academically And if you get in a situation where you're even with somebody and looking for that college scholarship or grant money or something, that pushes you over the edge. I mean, we even have discussions with people, especially on the college side. There could be a coach that's lining up the 6 shortstops that they all have in their top tier, and they're going to take 1 or 2 next year. And they're in the middle of their season. They're getting after it. He's busy. And all of a sudden, the recruiting coordinator decides, Wednesday night, we play a midweek game, or Tuesday, I'm going to stay in the office that night, and that's my night to call my shortstops that are on my top tier, and I'm going to check in with them. And that could be your dream school. And the coach makes the call and says, "Hey, Matt, this is Coach so-and-so just checking in, see how things are going." And on the other line, it's, "Oh, hey, they're okay. Like, how are things going with your team?" "Okay, yeah, we won today." And then you call the next guy. He says, Hey, Matt, how are you doing?" He said, "Oh, great, Coach, great. We got a 3-game winning streak. Our high school looks like we got a shot at the state championship. I've been a big part of it. I've been playing well. Some of the stuff I worked on in the off season starting to show in games." Like, who are you going to recruit there? Even if they got them rated exactly the same way, these guys are going to, potentially spend 4 years with this player and a lot of time around them. The guy with more energy, that's more exciting, that feels like the coach can trust him more probably and would be a better influence in the clubhouse and on the team if everything else, ability level, academics are the same, that's your guy. So there's always different ways that you're looking to differentiate yourself, I think, and earn that opportunity that everybody wants.
What a great call out. I love that you brought that up. I mean, obviously we interact with players all the time, right? And you're absolutely right. You see, and you got to remember, these players who are listening, these scouts and these recruiting coordinators are watching thousands of kids. And yeah, there are going to be some players naturally, it's like, oh yeah, they stack up pretty close. It's pretty close. So why not have that other skill set? And it's not, it is a skill set, but it's not the hardest. It's just showing an interest, right? Showing an interest. And think about it from the college recruiting coordinator's perspective. They've got to call a lot of kids. I'm sure some of those conversations are painful. So how can you just be aware and mindful of like, yeah, I want to put my best foot forward. And so my best way of doing that is, to showcase really who I am. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I love that you brought that up. That's a whole episode in and of itself, Steve.
It is. And your point of taking an interest also in that phone call, how much does a coach like it if you said, "Hey, saw you guys swept the conference weekend this weekend. That's awesome." Like that kind of stuff, it makes a difference.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, buddy, this has been great. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to come on. I will definitely put obviously the link and everything in the email in the show notes, so everybody listening will have a chance to reach out.
Great. Thanks for having me, Matt. I love what you're doing. Anybody like you that has a passion for this and wants to help these young players and families, I'm all in. That's what we do. We want people to play, maximize that potential, have a good time, and get as much out of this game as we have.
I love it. Well, thank you, Steve. We will, I'm sure, talk or see each other very soon at some of these events.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Matt.
Okay, man.